So welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the ADAS model.
Right. Aggregate demand and aggregate supply.
Exactly. It's an analytical guide designed for investors, students, and honestly, anyone who wants to actually understand the headlines. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have the ultimate decoder ring.
Yeah, you really will.
When you see a news alert about a central bank tweaking interest rates or a debate over some trillion-dollar government spending bill, you won't just be reading the news, you will see the underlying mechanics.
It's a profound shift in perspective, To truly grasp what's happening in the world, we have to look at how two distinct realities collide.
The goods market and the money market, right?
Exactly. The goods market, which is the physical stuff we make, and the money market, which is the financial system we use to trade that stuff. And the ADAS model, well, it bridges those two worlds.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can figure out what a country is capable of producing, we have to understand what everyone actually wants to buy.
Right.
Which leads us straight into the first half of the blueprint, aggregate demand, or AD.
So, aggregate demand represents the total spending on all goods and services in an economy at any given price level. And just to keep the mechanism crystal clear today, our sources assume a closed economy.
Meaning no imports or exports?
Yeah, we're putting a giant dome over our hypothetical country. We're just looking at the internal pressure of the system.
Got it. So in that closed loop, total demand is essentially three massive buckets of spending. The formula is AD equals C plus I plus G.
And those three variables, they dictate everything. So C is private consumption.
Like me buying coffee.
Exactly. It's the aggregate of all households buying groceries, paying rent, upgrading their phones. And the primary fuel for this bucket is disposable income, so whatever cash is left after taxes.
Okay, and then we have I, which is investment. But let's clarify that for a second, because in macroeconomic terms, investment does not mean you and I buying index funds on an app.
No, not at all.
It refers to businesses buying physical capacity, right? Like a logistics company buying a fleet of electric delivery trucks or, I don't know, a semiconductor firm building a new fabrication plant.
Exactly. And the fuel for that I bucket is the interest rate. So when interest rates are low, borrowing millions of dollars to build that fabrication plant is, well, it's cheap. Businesses expand.
Makes sense.
But when rates are high, the cost of that debt becomes prohibitive and corporate investment simply dries up.
Right, which leaves the final bucket, G, which is government spending. Funding highways, military defense, public research.
Yeah, and in this model, government spending is considered an exogenous variable, meaning it's a deliberate policy choice, largely independent of immediate market forces.
The government basically just votes on a budget and injects that money into the system.
Right, so we have our total demand, C, I, and G. But here is the defining feature of the aggregate demand curve when you graph it out. It slopes downward, meaning as the overall price level of the economy goes up, the total real output demanded by the economy goes down.
Okay, let me stop you there, because intuitively that feels a bit off to me.
How so?
Well, if the price of everything goes up, it's not like our society suddenly needs fewer calories to survive or, fewer miles of paved roads. So why does total output drop just because the price tag's changed?
And that is the exact trap most people fall into. They assume consumers just look at higher prices and consciously decide to buy fewer goods.
Right, like, oh, apples are expensive, I won't eat.
Exactly. But we're talking about aggregate macroeconomics here, not a single household's budget. The connection between rising prices and falling output, it's not a direct line.
Okay.
The damage actually happens through the back door via the money market.
Walk me through that back door. Because if the price level goes up, say, inflation spikes by 10%, I still have the exact same amount of money in my bank account today that I had yesterday.
You have the same nominal amount of money, yes. But your real money supply just shrank.
Yep.
Economists write this as M over P. So the total money supply divided by the price level. If prices jump 10%, the actual purchasing power of every dollar circulating in the economy is suddenly worth 10% less.
Wow. Okay, so effectively, millions of households and thousands of corporations realize they're fundamentally poor in real terms.
Exactly. They need more physical cash just to clear their daily operational hurdles.
Which means they stop depositing excess cash into the banking system, right? And they start drawing down their reserves.
Yes. Think of the banking system's liquidity as a giant sponge. Inflation acts like a hand squeezing that sponge. As prices rise, the real cash value is squeezed right out of the financial system.
And if the banking sponge is dry, banks have less money to lend out.
Right.
And when the supply of loanable funds drops, the price of borrowing that money has to go up, and the price of money is the interest rate. So interest rates spike.
Which brings us to the final brutal consequence. With interest rates skyrocketing, we look back at our three buckets, specifically business investment.
Oh, man. So that semiconductor plant that made financial sense at a 3% interest rate is suddenly a guaranteed bankruptcy at an 8% interest rate.
Exactly. The project gets canceled.
The construction workers aren't hired. The materials aren't purchased.
What's fascinating here is that this entire chain reaction, this negative relationship between prices and total economic output, is just a movement along the aggregate demand curve.
Wow.
It's a strictly mechanical financial throttle. Rising prices squeeze the real money supply, which forces interest rates up, which suffocates business investment, which ultimately drags down total demand.
Okay, that sponge metaphor really clarifies the demand side. We see how price levels manipulate the money market to throttle investment. But, I mean, wanting to buy a cupcake or having the loan to build a bakery doesn't magically put a cupcake on the shelf.
No, it doesn't.
Someone actually has to bake it, which brings us to the physical reality of the supply side.
Right, because demand is only half the equation. We have to look at what the economy is actually capable of producing. This is aggregate supply. And to understand the supply side of the blueprint, we have to introduce the most ruthless variable in economics, which is time.
The tale of two time frames. Because the model splits supply into the short run and the long run, and they operate under entirely different laws of physics, essentially.
They really do.
So let's look at the short run aggregate supply curve, the SRAS.
Okay, so in the short run, the supply curve has a positive slope. It points upward. That means if the overall price level in the economy rises, producers will actually respond by manufacturing more goods.
Okay, let me put myself in the shoes of a business owner. If I own a bakery, and suddenly the market price for cupcakes doubles because of inflation, my immediate reaction is to bake as many cupcakes as humanly possible to capture that profit.
Right, but ask yourself why baking more cupcakes is suddenly so much more profitable for you.
Because the price went up.
Sure, but the real secret lies in a concept called sticky prices, and more specifically, sticky wages.
Sticky wages. So if you're listening to this and you've ever wondered why your grocery bill seems to go up every single week, but your paycheck only goes up once a year, this is the exact mathematical reason why.
It's the reality of business contracts. In the short term, a business's costs are locked in.
Right.
You have a 5-year lease on your bakery storefront. You have a 1-year union contract with your bakers, specifying they make $25 an hour. You have a fixed price agreement with your flour supplier.
So when general inflation hits, the retail price of the cupcakes I sell shoots up immediately. But my operating costs, like my rent, my payroll, my ingredients, they're sticky. They don't move.
Exactly. For a window of time, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, higher retail prices translate into massive artificial profit margins.
Because my revenue doubled, but my costs stay the exact same.
Right. And what does a rational business do when margins explode? They run the machines overnight. They authorize overtime. They squeeze every ounce of productivity out of their existing setup. So in the short run, higher prices actually trick the economy into producing more output.
It's like a sugar rush. But you can only run the machines in the red for so long. Eventually, those contracts expire.
And reality catches up. The landlord sees the inflation data and doubles your rent upon renewal.
Right.
Your bakers realize their cost of living has skyrocketed and they demand $40 an hour. Your flour supplier hikes their rates.
So the stickiness wears off. My costs catch up to the new price level, my massive profit margins evaporate, and I stop paying for overtime. My production drops right back to where it was.
Which brings us to the long-run aggregate supply, or LRAS. When all prices and wages have fully adjusted, the chart looks completely different.
How different?
The LRAS curve isn't sloped at all. It is a perfectly straight vertical wall.
A vertical brick wall, meaning output does not change regardless of what the price level is doing.
Yes. It's vertical because it represents the absolute physical limit of the economy, assuming full employment. In the long run, national output isn't determined by price tags or financial tricks. It's determined strictly by the production function. The formula is Y total output equals a function of K being capital, plus L labor, multiplied by the level of technology.
Capital, labor, technology, the literal physical ingredients of civilization. Like, how many machines do we have? How many workers are clocked in? And how advanced is our scientific understanding?
That's it. That is your absolute ceiling.
Right.
Once you hit full employment, changes in the price level do not alter real output in the slightest.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let me play devil's advocate for a moment.
Sure.
You're telling me that no matter how high prices go, no matter how much money a government prints and pumps into the banking system to stimulate demand, a country cannot simply stimulate its way to producing more cars or computers in the long run.
You cannot print a tractor. You cannot print a skilled software engineer. You cannot print a breakthrough in quantum computing. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the ultimate grounding reality of economics. Real wealth is constrained by physical capacity, not by the amount of paper currency circulating.
Imagine the economy is already hitting that vertical wall, right? Every factory is running at capacity. Everyone who wants a job is employed.
Okay.
If the government suddenly drops $1 trillion into everyone's bank accounts, what actually happens? Demand skyrockets. Millions of people rush out to buy a new car.
But there are no unemployed factory workers left to build extra cars. There's no excess steel sitting around. The physical limit of capital and labor has been reached.
So you have a massive surge in demand colliding with a vertical wall of supply. What is the only variable that can give?
The price. Dealerships see 50 people fighting over 5 cars, so they just double the sticker price.
Wow.
The actual number of cars produced doesn't change by a single unit. We just get higher prices for the exact same amount of stuff.
Which brings us to the most crucial application of this entire model. We have our demand curve and our short-run and long-run supply curves. And where they all intersect is our economic equilibrium.
Right.
But the economy is a living thing. It gets hit by shocks. And to understand how policymakers react, we have to distinguish between sliding along a curve and physically shifting the curves entirely.
This is the critical distinction. Movement versus shifts. We established earlier that a change in the general price level, so inflation or deflation, only causes a movement along the lines. You're just tracing your finger up or down the existing curves.
Right. But a shift happens when the underlying structural components change.
Exactly. And when the curves shift, they create what economists call an output gap.
Like an output gap?
Yeah, it's the space between where the economy is currently operating in the short run and that vertical brick wall of long-run potential.
Let's visualize that gap because it explains so much of the political chaos we see. Let's say we suffer a massive financial shock, like the 2008 housing crisis. People panic. Their wealth is wiped out, and consumption, that C bucket we talked about, it just plummets.
Because a core component of aggregate demand dropped, the entire AD curve picks up and shifts to the left.
So our new short-run intersection point is far to the left of our vertical long-run wall. We have a negative output gap.
Also known as a recession.
Right.
In this scenario, the physical capacity still exists. The factories are sitting there. The workers are willing to work. But because demand has evaporated, businesses lay people off. The economy is operating below its potential.
So what does this all mean for the people actually running the country? Like, when they see a negative output gap, how do they use this blueprint to fix it?
Well, they look at their toolkits. And there are 2 fundamentally different toolkits for shifting the aggregate demand curve back to the right: fiscal policy and monetary policy.
Let's separate those out because they get conflated constantly in the press.
Yeah, they do.
Fiscal policy belongs to the government, right? The politicians, the treasury. It's about taxes and government spending.
Right. If the AD curve is shifted left into a recession, the government can use fiscal policy by massively increasing just spending billions on infrastructure projects to hire those unemployed workers.
Or I guess they can cut taxes, which instantly increases household disposable income, driving up C, consumption.
Exactly. Both actions forcefully push the aggregate demand curve back to the right.
But fiscal policy is notoriously slow, right? I mean, it takes an act of Congress just to build a bridge.
Very true.
Which brings us to the faster, sharper tool monetary policy. And this belongs exclusively to the central bank.
The central bank doesn't build bridges. They manipulate the money supply and interest rates. If they want to shift AD to the right, they artificially inject liquidity into that banking sponge we talked about earlier.
Ah, okay.
This drives interest rates down to 0, making borrowing virtually free. Suddenly, that bucket business investment explodes and demand surges back toward the vertical wall.
But it's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? Because diagnosing the cause of the output gap is everything. What happens if the recession wasn't caused by a drop in demand, but a collapse in supply, like the 1970s oil shocks.
This raises an important question, and it's perhaps the most dangerous trap in macroeconomics. In the 1970s, an energy crisis made it incredibly expensive to produce anything. So it wasn't the demand curve that moved. The short-run aggregate supply curve shifted dramatically to the left.
Oh, wow. So producing goods became so expensive that factories just shut down.
Exactly.
Why?
And this created a nightmare scenario called stagflation. You had high unemployment because factories were closing, but you also had skyrocketing prices because supply was so restricted.
And if policymakers misdiagnose that, like if they look at the high unemployment and say, let's use monetary policy to drop interest rates and stimulate demand, what happens?
Absolute disaster.
Yeah.
Supply capacity is broken, the physical goods aren't there. If you shift the demand curve to the right when supply is restricted, you don't create new jobs.
You just push prices astronomically higher?
You pour gasoline on the inflation fire.
It's like flooring the gas pedal when the car has a broken transmission. The engine screams, the temperature gauge pins into the red, but you don't move an inch forward.
Exactly. If you have a supply-side crisis, the only sustainable cure is to invest in long-term capacity. You have to move the vertical wall itself.
And shifting that long-run aggregate supply curve to the right is, well, it's the hardest thing for a society to do. You can't just vote for it or tweak an interest rate.
No, you can't.
You need tangible population growth to increase labor. You need massive capital accumulation to build more efficient factories.
Or you need a technological paradigm shift that makes your existing workers and factories exponentially more productive. Moving the LRAS wall to the right is the literal mathematical definition of true economic growth.
It's incredible how this blueprint demystifies the constant tug-of-war we hear in political debates. I mean, half the politicians are screaming, we need to stimulate demand so people can afford things, and the other half are screaming, we need to deregulate and invest in supply so we actually have things to afford.
And the ADS model proves that both sides are entirely correct.
Really?
But at different times and under completely different conditions. It all depends on where you are relative to that vertical wall.
Okay, let's bring this all together. We promised you a way to see the gears of the macroeconomic machine rather than just, standing out in the rain complaining about the weather. The relationship between the price of goods and the national output of a country is a mechanical chain reaction.
It operates through very distinct gears. The interest rate mechanism that throttles or accelerates business investment.
Right.
The sticky contracts that trick the economy into short-term bursts of hyperproduction. And finally, the unbreakable physical limits of capital, labor, and technology in the long run.
So the next time you see a headline about the central bank raising rates to cool off an overheating economy, or a debate about a new infrastructure bill closing a negative output gap, you don't have to feel helpless.
You really don't.
You have the mental framework to visualize exactly which curve they are trying to push, whether they are using fiscal or monetary tools, and exactly why they are doing it.
You're no longer just reacting to the storm, you're mapping the atmospheric pressure systems that create it.
But before we go, there is one piece of this blueprint that we really need to sit with. A final, somewhat provocative thought for you to mull over as you watch where the world is heading right now.
Okay.
We established that our ultimate economic ceiling, that vertical LRAS wall, is strictly limited by the physical realities of capital, labor, and technology.
Yes. The total output of human civilization is bound by how many machines we have, how many humans are working, and how smart our processes are. The model assumes labor and technology are two distinct inputs.
But what happens to the global economy when artificial intelligence fundamentally blurs the line between labor and technology?
Wow.
I mean, if a single piece of software can suddenly perform the cognitive labor of 10,000 data analysts or write complex software faster than an entire engineering department, what happens to that vertical wall?
It's a profound paradigm-shifting question. If technology can perfectly and infinitely simulate human labor, the traditional boundaries of physical productivity might suddenly evaporate. The variables in the equation just collapse into each other.
Exactly. How does an economy find its equilibrium when the speed limit of human output is suddenly removed? Are we about to shift that long-run curve further to the right than we ever dreamed possible, creating unimaginable abundance? Or are we going to break the mechanical gears of the system entirely?
That is the big question.
It's definitely something to think about the next time you look at the economic weather report. Until next time, thanks for diving deep with us.